Hi, so here we are, and from Insight to Impact, the video interviews with leaders in marketing strategy and research. And today, I am very happy to welcome Justin Amendola, marketing operations strategist and industry advisor. Um, and here he is. Justin, thanks so much for coming.
Jay, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks. And then I'll give a little background about you, just so people know. So Justin is a marketing strategy and operations leader with 20 plus years of building and scaling large global teams, processes, and technology in ways that connect campaigns to customers and revenue goals. He has built teams and cross-functional relationships that boost performance and morale, and believes deeply in metrics, accountability, and innovation across teams and lines of business. And and so, Justin, you are the person we want to talk to because very interested, of course, in the whole topic of how, from your experience, how customer insights get used. And Jim, obviously, we've talked in the past, and known each other for a long time. But I'm going to start with a really very general question of, what both my colleagues and I are very interested in knowing: what role do customer insights typically play in shaping strategy at large companies? And what I think you worked at Meta in a senior role for over a decade, so I think that would count as a large company. So,
And a bit bigger today than when I first started in 2013. And
absolutely.
before Meta, just to give everybody some background, I was at Pitney Bowes, and then Jay, you and I first met on the agency side at McCann World Group, doing work for organizations like the U.S. Army. So I have the benefit of seeing it from both sides, agency side and client side.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so on that note, tell me from your point of view, really, when thinking of customer insights, how does that work? Like, what role do customer insights play when we're talking about shaping strategy in companies like that?
Yeah, when I think of um, the most successful companies tend to design products or services around the needs of their customers. So understanding the customer, getting at the insight, is really the first step that successful companies take. And then that in turn helps them target and justify significant investment, whether that be in product, whether that be in CapEx and infrastructure. And large companies that do this best typically have teams and the infrastructure to do this systematically. It's not always kind of a one-off thing that they plan or go at. And so when I think about the types of insights, at least in my experience, there's a few that come to mind. There's first-party product or service usage data. And this is really understanding, if you have scale, how your customers are interacting with a product or service, and leveraging the insights from that data to understand what your opportunities are. I would say that this was the gold standard for a company like Meta because of the scale of their platform, both in terms of consumer usage, but also business to business and ads. And often the first party product or service data is consolidated within a CDP or some sort of data warehouse system to make it easier for marketers like myself to get at, manipulate, and use. The second part of data that I think about is third-party industry research data. So this is often conducted by for-profit companies like Gartner, eMarketer, or Circana. And it's typically sold in more of a report format, although I think many of those organizations will design custom studies for a client if their approach. But this can also be helpful when you're trying to frame generally dynamics that are impacting an industry or a particular customer group that you're interested in. And then the last area that kind of springs to mind is primary customer research, right? And this is where you and I first got started. But this is traditionally focus group, quantitative surveys. These are designed with a specific purpose or question in mind. And there's a high degree of customization around a company, a concept, or a customer audience. And what's cool about the primary research is companies that are good about this can use it longitudinally. And so they can track changes in their customer bases or an industry over time, and have that written record, which is always good if you're, maybe a cyclical business or something that has a 4 or 5 year kind of selling or product sales cycle.
Yes, yeah, obviously, yeah, the primary research is the field that I think a lot of our viewers are interested in, but it's very interesting to see how that fits in with the first party data and that third party industry data. Um, and kind of just understanding how that fits is very helpful. I'm just thinking about this. You mentioned using that research longitudinally. Um, it sounds like kind of a best case scenario. I've been thinking about situations that we've all encountered where um, the research findings they don't get used, they don't translate into decisions, they get ignored. And obviously we've all experienced that, but I'm very interested to hear from your experience. What what is the difference between insights that actually get used from those that sit on the shelf, and think from the point of view of what can we be doing to both design and conduct research that results in something that actually has impact and actually helps the client.
Yeah. Well, I think companies that do this successfully or just are successfully in general, they tend to start with a question, and they tend to try to have the question drive the opportunity or the insight pertaining to their audiences or product groupings. And so, with that in mind, I think research and insights tend to be most valuable and likely to be used when the market research team that's doing all of this forms deep relationships with their product, sales, and marketing organizations. And usually it starts by having a strong top down sense of strategic priorities at the company level. You need to have alignment around what the important big rocks are in a company's operating plan. And that typically helps align it around a set of priorities. And that in turn should indicate some of the opportunities or questions that market research can address. So when you have that, it becomes easier to think about, like, what is the big product opportunity? What are the known barriers to selling that product or driving adoption of that product? And then you can think of that from a product, from a sales, and from a marketing perspective, and you can design your research around those questions or barriers. So a great example might be a company that has a 50% revenue growth priority for a product in a given year. And the way that's going to translate to product sales and marketing might be a bit different. But at the end of the day, you're going to have a defined audience or set of audiences and a defined product. And you can go through and you can plan the nuance around what product sales and marketing each need in order to be effective. And if you conduct the research in a way that lends those insights to each organization, you're not only going to make that easier for teams to use. And when I've seen this done well, those insights tend to be used year round. And it also tends to drive a lot of commonality in terms of how you're messaging in product, how marketing may be messaging above the line broadly in driving awareness and demand of a product and category, and then in how sales is selling in one-to-one environments. And it really helps expedite, the sort of customer acquisition, onboarding, and even value growth if you're trying to get people to use more of your products and maybe adopt other products over their life cycle.
Hmm. You know, so as you're saying this, I realize, and you and I had also spoken a bit in advance, this point of the interaction between the teams within a company, having the research team, the you mentioned the product team, marketing, all that type of thing. It makes total sense, but then I'm wondering, you've been worked with a variety of large companies. I imagine that making that happen is kind of easier said than done. Any thoughts or tips of how do you make sure that you have that connection between the teams? Because obviously the nightmare for all of us is when, oh, you're already halfway down the road to doing something, and then some other team pops in. It's like, no, 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 this needs to be completely something else, you know?
It's a great call, and thanks for pushing on this because I've seen it done well and I've seen it done poorly. I think there's two ways to go about doing this. The classic way is you have an executive leadership team that has a vision for a tops-down plan. That might work in a more mature, stable industry where you have many years of people working and collaborating in a more traditional way. And you have the luxury of defining a strategic plan and then outlining your monetary or budgeting investments based on the strategic plan, and then you go into execution. And that helps keep all of these organizations aligned around the same sets of priorities and monetary opportunities. The second way to do this is more laterally. And think about it from a market research leader's perspective. Going out and figuring out who your leadership colleague is in marketing, product can be tough because usually there are many products, but figuring out who those product leaders are, maybe on your core set of product priorities, and then doing the same thing with sales and just saying, what are your big bets for the year? And getting people together in a room for maybe a half a day planning session where everybody can put their top five down and you can start to see the points of overlap. And maybe the easiest place to start are the obvious points of overlap versus trying to push everybody off of their priorities and change their plans. And at least there, if everybody has a top five, maybe two or even three of those priorities are common across product, marketing, and sales. And from a market research perspective, there starts to be clarity on what types of insights are going to yield value and how you're asking people to use them.
That's that sounds like a great approach. Obviously, that's something that I feel needs to be done internally at the client company, but also I imagine from the researcher's side, it's something that could be asked about, even offered. It's like, hey, you want us to facilitate that meeting if they're not doing it already, you know, the research executives.
Yeah, I often get into this with practitioners that I talk with. And people are quick to throw up their hand and say, I can't do this. There's too much chaos and dysfunction. And I always try to walk them back to understanding you have a lot more leverage and power than you give yourself credit for. And I would say everybody can put together a short list of their allies or the people of power in each of those organizations, and everybody should feel empowered to reach out and say, why don't we get our plans more aligned? Nobody in sales, marketing, or product has ever said customer insights have zero value, right? Like where the debate is are they valuable enough? Are they actionable enough? And so by bringing people together and trying to form a more cohesive plan, you give yourself a better chance of generating insights that will be usable and help your organization and team build the political currency you need to be even better in future years.
Yeah, yeah, this is very helpful to hear. Now, on the flip side, you had mentioned that kind of companies tend to make more mistakes when they start with an idea and then try to validate that specific idea with customers. Tell me about that side of things and what we need to watch out for there.
Yes. So I'm very aware of the glass houses phenomenon. And I just want to caveat that we're all guilty of going into research with an idea first mentality, including me. And I can think many years ago, I was part of a client side product development and marketing team. And we were designing and marketing a suite of digital productivity applications for a company that was a legacy physical logistics giant. So it was a big stretch, right? New technologies, new selling mechanisms, change was afoot. And our team had started with the idea that this was needed, that the company had to evolve or potentially die. And so what we did is we defined the small and medium-sized business market as the primary target audience for this. And we engaged an outside vendor to conduct a series of focus groups and then do some follow-up quantitative research, kind of a classical approach there. So we went into the focus groups, and it was pretty clear in the first focus group. that everybody struggled to see this company as credible in the space. And so that should have been the first big aha is, have we done enough to really establish credibility and kind of build why? And then the second thing is, when we got into the suite of apps, and there were several of them, people looked at a few of the apps and said, I don't really need that. I can't envision myself using it. And so that should have been the second inflection point. Okay, maybe we should scale this down a bit and focus on launching the first one or two and gaining traction there. So in any event, true to traditional marketing form, we plowed ahead and we said, well, let's make this how we can stand out, how we can best name this to get attention in the marketplace and get people very excited about it. Well, suffice to say, when we went to market and launched, it wasn't nearly as impactful from a product adoption and revenue perspective as we would have liked. And about 6 months later, we ended up shelving a few of the apps that the focus group, sure enough, said weren't as valuable or relevant. And we could have saved ourselves a lot of time and energy, Jay, had we just come to the immediate conclusion that we need to step this back and we need to scale it down and kind of rethink how we launch. And I think there's a classic fallacy at organizations. Like, you've committed to a big project or a big initiative, and we have to launch it come hell or high water. And it's very easy to destroy value and resources when you take that project or company first approach versus listening to your customers, even if it's a painful set of feedback. Painful feedback leads to good things and good growth in the long term. We just need to be open to using it.
Yeah, that 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 brings up so many questions because obviously there's the egos involved, and especially when the senior person wanted it, and who's going to be the one to say, we really need to consider shelving this. It's a scary thing, and I'm just thinking of a situation where I very politely pointed out it was a little bit like Emperor's New Clothes situation, where something they said, okay, we don't want you to ask about this in the research, so I didn't. And without me asking, every single participant brought that thing up, and so I very politely said, look, we didn't ask about this, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention that every single person brought this up. There was a dead silence in the room. Someone said something, well, people, our senior staff feel very strongly about so and so, and I persona non grata. I was never hired again, or at least not for at least 15 years until the people changed. So on one hand, you have that, but then flip side, and this is going to show how old I am. Uh, there's the story about the Walkman, where the story goes, might not even be true, that they said in a focus group, hey, would you guys like a small tape recorder that you could carry around with you? And it can't record, but it can play. And people were like, no, we don't want that. And then, of course, they plowed ahead and did it anyway, and the Walkman was a huge success. But you could also say that question wasn't really asked properly. They should have asked, would you like a device that would enable you to carry your music with you wherever you go? But I think these stories are in the back of people's minds when marketers say, and even in that example that you gave with the apps, it's like, you know what? People don't really know what they want. And once it comes out, they're going to want this. And like, how do you balance? How do you figure out when it's the former and when it's the latter?
It's tough because marketers, especially, are pushed that you need to be strategic and you need to have a bold vision and be a thought leader. And that often leads them to look so far forward that, while many of the apps that we shelved years ago are probably commonly used today, I know for a fact they are. If the market isn't ready, no amount of pushing or investment is going to make it so. I mean, certainly not for a company of that size. I mean, they didn't have the financial power to build a market the way that maybe an Apple or somebody else can. One of my favorite case studies of this phenomenon, there's a documentary, I think I watched it on Netflix. It's about General Magic, I think is the name of the company. And they effectively invented the iPhone 20 years before the iPhone was a thing. And they had a vision for something called the Palm Crystal. And it was a really cutting edge. And in fact, many of the hardware and software teams that worked on this wound up going to Apple and working with Steve Jobs on the launch of the iPhone and eventually the Apple Watch. And it just goes to show you that the brightest minds and the best idea, if the market isn't ready, are destined to fail. So coming back to the insights, it's really important to understand whether your audience is ready for this and be prepared to act on that information and maybe temper your plan, temper the timing, temper the investment.
Yeah, yeah. This Thanks. It's very helpful and very it shows that it's not so simple, but that's the things we need to think about. Absolutely.
It's
Uh,
tough because we all believe and anchor on things that we think are right. And hunches have played a strong role in US business and culture. But sometimes the hunches are early or they're not exactly right. And so it's important to kind of listen and pause.
yeah, yeah. Now, so we talked about planning the research, conducting the research. Then, one challenge that I have seen is not just getting to the insights, but then getting buy-in internally. And I'm wondering about that as far as what have you seen as kind of the most effective ways to communicate insights so that stakeholders act on them?
Yeah. So buy-in is often a result of processes and how teams kind of align and work together. But it comes back to the earlier point that we discussed, which is the relationships with stakeholder organizations. And so a key part of getting buy-in is making sure that product, sales, marketing, and other stakeholders beyond just those three are aligned on what is important. They're aligned on what questions are most valuable to answer, and they're aligned on the market research organization playing a lead role in defining them. So I think that's step one. And then being able to build a relationship plan based on that increases the likelihood that it will be used and valued and kind of a going concern within the organization because people are not only, they agree on what's going to be coming, but they're waiting for it. And they have clear use cases for it. At Meta, our marketing team would commonly generate insights each quarter for our sales organization. And because that was defined in advance, we understood the products, the industries, the types of case studies that we wanted to generate. Sales regularly used it. And it was a wonderful case study, and the market research team became larger and more successful because of that alignment. So I would say alignment is the first step. And then the second is building incrementally. So we went back to the example where if everybody has a top five and only two or three of those top five align across the organization, don't be afraid to start smaller. Don't be afraid to say, we want to answer five key questions this year and make sure that we're driving value when the organization is seeing financial value from this before we scale. Especially in growth industries, growth businesses, the tendency is just to ramp up and staff up because we can, because the organization's growing and we expect there to be demand for the services. But don't be afraid to slow down a little bit and just make sure that you're investing in the right places and the organization sees the value. And then lastly, and this is something that service teams are chronically bad at doing, remind your stakeholders of the wins and insights that you're generating. Communicate that over the course of the year. Say, we committed to X and Y and we delivered X and Y, and you have told us that this is adding value in these types of ways. And I think teams are so involved in the work and executing the plan that they don't take a step back and kind of celebrate for themselves and their stakeholders the wins that they're generating for the organization.
It's really helpful to hear you say this, that really, and it makes total sense that in the end, if you want to get buy-in on the insights, you had to get buy-in on the plan. And if not, it sounds like, trying to create I don't know, a snappy infographic isn't going to help you much, although it might help a little bit to make it more digestible. But really, it sounds like that initial buy-in is so important. So in other words, if I'm in a client meeting and I hear someone say, "Now, why are we doing this research again?" That would be a big red flag. It's like, oh, we need to slow way down and go back to, what is the plan and why?
And I think when you remind people, you can always reflect back onto those decisions. We agreed on these two areas for X and Y reason. We believe that there's a value in answering these questions, and we're going to do that in these ways. We executed that plan throughout the year. Here are the outputs of that, and here are how you are telling us you're using these insights. And if you can eventually translate those insights into revenue and product terms, right? Like these insights have helped product drive adoption by 30%, which we believe is translated into X million in revenue that we wouldn't have otherwise had, even better. But that last part can be a bit challenging when you sit so far upstream, like market research.
Yeah, absolutely. This is all extremely helpful to understand how things work, but I want to make sure I also get your input on kind of looking ahead. I'm wondering, just from your point of view, thinking of the role for insights in a world of big data and AI. What are your thoughts, like as far as where, if at all, do can human insights remain, irreplaceable?
This is a big question. There's certainly a lot of change happening. And so I'll answer it based on my beliefs right now and kind of reserve the right to always modify my beliefs going forward. Um, Most companies are what I would say are data rich and information poor. And I always think that there's value in translating data into usable insights that answer these product and marketing questions in meaningful ways. So I always think that there will be a need for somebody that can take the data, whether it's first party company data, whether it's third party research data, and kind of like parse out what's usable and serve that up to different stakeholders through the year. I also think humans, for the time being, are better at understanding context, especially relating to the behaviors of other humans. Um, and I think that context is critical to sales and marketing activities, right? Like, what are the belief systems? How do we attach to people on more of an emotional level versus just a rational level? And I think that there's going to be value there in parsing out the context and making it resonate more emotionally. That could change. AI is rapidly evolving, and it seems like every day I wake up to another news headline that AI is now capable of passing XYZ exam and it's getting smarter. But I always counsel people worried about AI. If you can think strategically, I think there will always be value for humans in this work and in this field. And then the last thing I would say is I would encourage research teams to look at AI as a complement, not competition. There's always going to be more data going forward, and AI strength is going to be parsing the data and quickly pulling out possible insights. And where human researchers can focus is on the 20% of work that is saying, we're validating these insights, and we think these insights are going to be valuable, and we're kind of serving up potential uses to our stakeholders. So that could translate in the future to leaner teams. I think every company, as a result of AI, is looking at potentially having leaner teams, but it could also translate into teams that are the same size, but are able to reinvest those time savings into more business growth activities. So think of that last example as a market research team of 10 that can only support 2 industries and 5 products. In the future, could grow to 10 industries and 50 products because they're able to focus on the 20% of work that has the highest value with help from AI.
Yeah, that I find that's somewhat uh, comforting or hopeful, because at times it seems like, oh my gosh, AI is taking over everything. But someone recently gave the example. I hadn't thought of this analogy to in the 80s when the personal computers became commonly started to become commonly used. People said, well, there's going to be no the mass of knowledge workers, everyone's going to be fired because the computer can do so much more, so much faster. And that did not happen at all. There was no reduction. It's just that there was an expectation. And indeed, what happened is that all of these workers could accomplish a lot more. So fingers crossed that something similar happens with AI. It sounds like it is likely, actually, that we could see a similar progression.
I definitely think that's where we're headed, and the companies that are most successful will figure out that complementary role, and they'll make their employees, their human employees, better and more productive, and more value generating. And so it's going to be exciting. It's going to be great to be part of it, and kind of watch it all unfold. And you and I will be able to reap the benefits of all of this.
Yes, I think that is a wonderful, hopeful note to end on. So, Justin, thanks so much. I really appreciate all your input on this. This has been very helpful. And as I said, kind of encouraged me too.
Awesome. Jay, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.